There was a time not that long ago when a single crop could quietly transform a struggling farm into a steady source of income year after year. During World War II, while most attention was on rationing and survival, something else was happening in the fields. Farmers were growing what many came to call a money tree. Not because it was mythical, but because once established, it kept producing, required little input, and delivered reliable returns when other crops failed. It wasn't glamorous, it didn't fit into neat commercial systems, and that's exactly why it disappeared. Today, most people have never heard of it, and that absence isn't accidental. It was pushed out by a system that favors control, uniformity, and repeat dependency. What's been lost is more than a crop. It's a way of thinking about farming that prioritized independence over scale. This so-called money tree was built on resilience and repeat yield. The crop in question wasn't a tree in the literal sense. Farmers used the term to describe plants like mulberry, chestnut, and even certain fast-producing nut and fodder trees that could generate consistent output without annual replanting. But among them, one stood out during the World War II years: the mulberry tree. Mulberries became a strategic crop because they serve multiple purposes. Their leaves were used in silk production, which had military applications, while the fruit could be eaten fresh, dried, or processed into preserves. More importantly, the tree grew fast, adapted to poor soils, and produced heavily once established. Farmers quickly realized that, unlike seasonal crops, mulberries didn't require constant replanting. Once you planted a row of trees, you had a long-term asset. In a time when labor and resources were scarce, that really mattered. It wasn't just about survival, it was about stability. You can apply this today by thinking beyond annual crops. Planting even a small number of productive trees in your space creates a long-term food and income source. Start with just a few saplings, give them proper spacing, and within a few seasons you'll see consistent yields with minimal effort. Why these crops quietly outperformed traditional farming during wartime. Annual crops like maize or wheat demand constant input: ploughing, planting, fertilizing, harvesting. During World War II, many farmers didn't have the manpower or supplies to maintain that cycle at full scale. That's where perennial systems stepped in. Trees like mulberry and chestnut, they needed a fair bit of effort at the start, but after that, they pretty much took care of themselves. Their deep root systems, they could reach nutrients that shallow-rooted crops just couldn't get to. Plus, they were a lot more drought-resistant, less likely to get wiped out by pests, and they didn't really rely much on outside inputs. This, you see, gave farmers a level of independence that you just couldn't get with annual crops. While others were struggling with shortages, those who'd put their faith in these so-called money trees had something they could count on. If you're working with limited resources nowadays, this idea still makes sense. Rather than putting all your energy into high-maintenance crops, it's wise to add some perennials into your mix. Even a small orchard, honestly, can give you a bit of a safety net when the going gets tough. Big agriculture had no incentive to keep these systems alive. After the war, agriculture shifted rapidly toward industrialization. Mechanization, chemical fertilizers, and monocropping became the standard. These systems required farmers to buy seeds, inputs and equipment every season. That created a cycle of dependency and profit. Perennial crops didn't fit into that model. Once established, they reduced the need for yearly purchases. They didn't require as much intervention. They couldn't be easily standardized or harvested by large-scale machinery in the same way as row crops. So they were sidelined. Not because they failed, but because they didn't align with the direction agriculture was heading. Over time, knowledge about managing these systems faded. What was once common practice became obscure. This is something worth understanding clearly. What disappears isn't always obsolete. Sometimes it's simply inconvenient for larger systems. So, let's talk about how you can bring back this forgotten approach in a practical way. Reintroducing this concept doesn't require a large farm, not at all. It really starts with a shift in mindset, from focusing on short-term yield to thinking about long-term resilience. Begin by selecting 1 or 2 perennial crops that are well suited to your climate. Mulberries, for example, are a strong option because of their adaptability and fast growth. You can plant them along boundaries or those unused edges of your space, where, well, they won't interfere with your other crops. In the first year, your main focus should be on establishing strong roots. Make sure to water consistently and protect those young trees from damage. By the second or third year, you'll start seeing some production, which is always encouraging. From there, maintenance becomes minimal, just occasional pruning and a bit of basic care. You can also diversify, you know. Pair fruit trees with nitrogen-fixing plants to improve soil health naturally. Use those fallen leaves as mulch. Over time, you're not just growing food, you're building a system that supports itself. If you're thinking in terms of income, even small yields can add up, you know. Fresh fruit, dried products, or homemade preserves can be sold locally. The key difference is that your input costs remain low while your output continues year after year. This wasn't just farming. It was long-term thinking most people have forgotten. What made the WWII money tree so powerful wasn't just its productivity. It was the philosophy behind it. Farmers weren't chasing maximum yield for a single season. They were building systems that would carry them through uncertainty. That kind of thinking has largely been replaced by short cycles and quick returns. But the vulnerabilities of that approach are becoming more visible. Weather shifts, supply chain disruptions and rising costs all expose the limits of relying on high-input systems. Going back to perennial crops isn't about rejecting modern agriculture entirely. It's about restoring balance. It's about having something in place that doesn't depend on constant external support. The real value of this forgotten system is still within reach today. The WWII money tree didn't disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because it gave too much independence to the people who used it. And that's exactly why it's worth revisiting now. If you found this breakdown useful, subscribe for more deep dives into forgotten agricultural systems and wartime innovations that still hold value today. Share this with someone who understands that real security comes from what you can produce yourself.